The homeless black boy's hands were shaking as he pressed down on the little girl's chest. Her father, leather vest, Hell's Angels patch, was charging toward him, fury in his eyes. Malik had seconds to bring her back before everything went wrong. What happened in the next 60 seconds would change his life forever. And what happened 72 hours later, nobody in that neighborhood saw it coming. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are watching from in the comments. Enjoy the story. The afternoon sun hung low over Maple Street, casting long golden shadows across the cracked sidewalk where dandelions pushed through concrete like small acts of defiance. It was the kind of light that made everything look softer, kinder, like the whole world had been dipped in honey. The air was warm but not heavy, carrying the scent of fresh cut grass and the distant promise of summer evenings that stretch on forever. In this light, even the ordinary seemed touched by magic. The faded blue mailboxes, the chain-link fences, the small brick houses with their neat little yards. Everything glowed. And there, moving through this golden hour like she was part of the light itself, was a little girl on a purple bicycle. Her name was Lily Bennett, 7 years old, with sandy blonde pigtails that bounced against her shoulders and a gap-toothed smile that could disarm the hardest heart. The bicycle was her pride and joy. Metallic purple with white handlebar streamers that caught the breeze, a small bell that she rang at every corner, and a basket on the front that currently held a stuffed bear named Mr. Paws. She'd gotten the bike for her birthday 3 months ago, and since then, she'd ridden it every single day. Rain or shine, hot or cold, Lily and that purple bicycle were inseparable. She knew every crack in the sidewalk, every place where the concrete buckled from tree roots, every house where a dog might bark, every corner where she needed to slow down. This was her route, her territory, the small kingdom she ruled from her bicycle seat. She'd pedaled this same path so many times she could probably do it with her eyes closed, though her father always told her that was a terrible idea. And please, please never try it. Lily pedaled with the confidence of a child who'd never known real danger. Her legs pumped in steady rhythm. Her hands gripped the handlebars with casual certainty, and her face held that particular expression of pure contentment that only children can achieve. Complete presence in the moment. No thought for yesterday or tomorrow. Just the joy of movement and sunshine and being exactly where she wanted to be. What Lily didn't know, couldn't know, was that she had exactly 43 seconds before her world went dark. 43 seconds of normalcy, of innocence, of believing that today was just like every other day that she'd ride home, park her bike in the garage, and run inside to tell her dad about her day at school. 43 seconds before everything changed. But those 43 seconds, they were still hers, still perfect, still untouched by what was coming. She rang her bell as she passed Mrs. Higgins' house, even though Mrs. Higgins wasn't outside. It was tradition. Then she waved at the Hendersons' golden retriever sitting in the window. Another tradition, and the dog tilted its head in what Lily chose to interpret as a wave back. These small rituals mattered to her. They were the threads that stitched her world together, made it feel safe and known, and wonderfully, beautifully predictable. From the alley between 5th and 6th Street, someone else was watching. His name was Malik. Though most people in this neighborhood didn't know that, because most people in this neighborhood didn't see him at all. 10 years old, he'd mastered the art of invisibility. Not the magical kind, but the kind that comes from necessity, from survival, from learning that when you look like him, young, black, and homeless, being unseen is often safer than being noticed. He stood in the shadows between a dumpster and a chain-link fence. His small frame was almost swallowed by clothes that were 3 sizes too big. The jeans were held up with a rope belt. The jacket was stained and torn at one elbow. The sneakers had holes in both toes and didn't match. One was red, one was black. Because when you're taking shoes from a donation bin behind the community center at 3 in the morning, you don't have the luxury of finding a matching pair. Malik's dark skin was smudged with dirt. His hair, a dense cushion of tight coils, was unkempt because he didn't have a comb or a mirror, and his deep brown eyes held something that no 10-year-old's eyes should hold. A weary understanding of how hard the world could be. He'd been living on these streets for 6 months. Before that, there had been foster homes, 3 of them in 2 years, each one proving that not all houses are homes, that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you most need protection from. So he'd run, just walked out one day and decided that sleeping in abandoned buildings and eating from soup kitchens was better than pretending to be grateful for a roof that came with racial slurs, bruises, and the constant reminder that he was a burden nobody really wanted. The streets had their own dangers, but at least they were honest about it. Malik had claimed this alley as one of his spots. It was relatively safe, well lit enough that no one bothered him at night, hidden enough that most people walked past without looking in. He'd wedged a flattened cardboard box behind the dumpster where he could sleep if the condemned building 3 blocks over got too cold or too crowded with other homeless folks. He'd stashed a backpack with his few possessions, some granola bars he'd saved from the shelter, a library book he'd borrowed and would probably never be able to return, and a photograph of his mother that was creased and faded from being handled too much. His mother, that's where this all started, really, where the invisible boy's story began. She'd been everything to him. Keisha Williams, 28 years old, working 2 jobs, raising a son on her own, and doing it all with a smile that made Malik believe everything would be okay. She hummed gospel tunes while she cooked. She helped him with homework, even when she was exhausted. She called him her little king, and meant it with her whole heart. And then one day, when Malik was 8 years old, she'd collapsed in their apartment. Just fell. One moment she was standing at the stove making eggs, and the next moment she was on the floor unconscious. And 8-year-old Malik had no idea what to do. He'd called 911, his small fingers shaking so hard he could barely press the buttons, and he'd waited beside her, holding her hand against his cheek, telling her to wake up. "Please wake up, Mama, please." The paramedics said she'd had a cardiac event, an undiagnosed heart condition. Nothing anyone could have predicted, nothing anyone could have prevented. She died at the hospital 3 days later, and Malik's world ended with her. That was 2 years ago. Sometimes it felt like 2 lifetimes. Now standing in his alley, Malik watched the world pass by like he was separated from it by thick glass. He watched people come and go, families walking together, kids laughing, parents holding hands, and he felt the familiar ache of being outside of life looking in. He'd been watching this little girl on her purple bicycle for weeks now. She rode past his alley almost every day around the same time. Always with that same joyful expression, always so confident and safe and loved. He wondered what that felt like. To be loved, to be safe, to have somewhere to go. He'd never spoken to her, never even thought about it. You don't approach when you're invisible. You don't insert yourself into the bright, normal world of people who belong. You just watch. You just remember what it used to feel like back when you belonged too. The little girl pedaled closer, her streamers dancing in a breeze, and Malik found himself smiling just a little. There was something about her joy that was contagious, that reached even into his shadows and reminded him that good things still existed in the world, even if they weren't for him. She rang her bell. The clear, cheerful sound echoed down the street. And then something changed. Malik saw it before she did. The way her hands suddenly went to her chest. The way her pedaling faltered. Just a tiny hesitation. barely noticeable. But Malik noticed. He'd spent 2 years watching people, learning to read the small signs that most folks missed. He saw the confusion cross her face, saw her try to shake it off to keep pedaling. The bicycle wobbled. Lily's other hand left the handlebar. Both palms now pressed against her chest like she was trying to hold something in or keep something out. Her face went pale, all that sun-kissed color draining away in seconds. The bike swerved left, then right, and her feet slipped off the pedals. Malik took a step forward, some instinct telling him something was very, very wrong. The little girl's eyes went unfocused. Her body went slack. And then, as if someone had simply turned her off, she fell. Not a dramatic fall, not a cinematic tumble with flailing arms and screams, just gone. Consciousness severed like a cut wire. Her small body tilted sideways and crumpled to the pavement with the awful heavy sound of dead weight hitting concrete. The bicycle crashed beside her, wheels still spinning, streamers tangled, Mr. Paws thrown from the basket onto the sidewalk. For a moment, everything stopped. The world held its breath. Malik stood frozen at the edge of his alley, his mind refusing to process what his eyes had just seen. The sunny afternoon suddenly felt wrong, like the light was lying, like the warmth was a trick. Because warm, safe afternoons aren't supposed to contain moments like this. Children on purple bicycles aren't supposed to just fall and not get up. But she wasn't getting up. She lay on the sidewalk, one arm bent underneath her at an angle that looked painful. Her sandy pigtails spread across the concrete, her eyes closed, her chest not moving. Not moving! That's what broke through Malik's shock. The realization that her chest wasn't rising and falling, that she wasn't breathing, that this wasn't a simple fall or a scraped knee or something that a Band-Aid and a hug could fix. This was the moment, the one he'd been too young to recognize 2 years ago, the one he'd been helpless during, the one that had taken his mother while he sat beside her, holding her hand, doing nothing because he didn't know what else to do. But he wasn't that helpless 8-year-old anymore. Malik's feet moved before his brain fully caught up. He ran from the alley, his mismatched shoes slapping against the pavement, his oversized jacket flapping behind him. He ran the way you run when seconds matter, when hesitation means death, when every moment of delay is unforgivable. He reached her in 5 seconds, dropped to his knees beside her in 6. Up close, she looked even smaller, even more fragile. Her skin had taken on a grayish tint, and there was already a scrape forming on her cheek from where she'd hit the ground. Malik's dark hands hovered over her, shaking, his mind racing through fragments of memory, pieces of information he'd collected 6 months ago at a shelter on the other side of town. It had been a Tuesday night. Malik had been sleeping in an abandoned warehouse, but it was January, and the cold was the kind that could kill you. So he'd swallowed his pride and gone to the 5th Street shelter for a hot meal and a place to sleep. They'd been running a community training program that evening. CPR and basic first aid, taught by a volunteer named Ms. Carter, who worked as a nurse at County General. Most of the adults in the shelter hadn't paid much attention. They'd been there for the food and warmth, not the education. But Malik had watched every single demonstration, had listened to every word, had asked questions after everyone else had shuffled off to their cots. "Why do you want to know all this, sweetie?" Miss Carter had asked him, her voice kind but curious. "Just in case," Malik had said. "I want to be ready just in case." He'd been thinking about his mother, about that awful moment when he'd stood helpless, about the promise he'd made to himself in the 2 years since, that he'd never be unprepared again, that if someone collapsed in front of him, he'd know what to do. He'd never expected it to be a little girl on a purple bicycle. Malik checked her breathing the way Miss Carter had taught him, leaned close, watched her chest, felt for air against his cheek. Nothing. She wasn't breathing. His heart hammered against his ribs. His hands shook worse. But somewhere underneath the fear there was something else. A strange, cold clarity, a sense of purpose that cut through the panic like a blade. He couldn't save his mother. But maybe he could save this girl. Malik tilted her head back gently the way he'd been shown, checked her airway, pinched her nose, gave 2 rescue breaths, watching her chest rise slightly with each one. Then he positioned his hands over her sternum, one palm over the other, fingers interlaced. The contrast of his dark skin against her pale shirt was stark in the sunlight. He'd practiced this on the training dummy 6 months ago, pressing down until Ms. Carter said he had the depth right. He thought then that he'd never actually use this, that it was just information, just preparation, just a way to feel less helpless in a world that had proven itself to be overwhelmingly cruel. Now, kneeling on a sun-warmed sidewalk beside a 7-year-old girl who wasn't breathing, Malik understood that preparation and desperation were 2 sides of the same coin. He pressed down. 30 compressions. Ms. Carter had said hard and fast, "Don't be afraid to push. You're trying to manually pump blood to the brain. Broken ribs heal. Brain death doesn't." Malik counted in his head, his thin arms working, his whole body putting weight into each compression. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Her small chest compressed under his hands. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. He couldn't think about how fragile she looked. 14, 15, 16. Couldn't think about whether he was doing this right. 17, 18, 19. Could only count. 20, 21, 22. Could only push. 23, 24, 25. Could only hope. 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. 2 breaths, 30 more compressions. His world narrowed to this, to the rhythm, to the count, to the desperate attempt to force life back into a small body that had given up. The street was still quiet. Nobody else had noticed yet. The crash of the bicycle hadn't been loud enough to draw attention, and Malik was just a homeless black kid kneeling on a sidewalk, the kind of thing people's eyes skipped over, or viewed with suspicion, even when they looked directly at it. But across the street, in the driveway of a small brick house, someone had noticed. Caleb Bennett was unloading groceries from the back of his pickup truck, moving with the efficient casualness of a man who'd done this routine 100 times. He was a big man, 6'2", broad-shouldered with tattooed arms and a thick reddish-brown beard that he kept neatly trimmed. He wore jeans, boots, and a leather vest that proclaimed his affiliation with a simple patch across the back. Hell's Angels, Vice President, Maple Street. Chapter. Caleb had been with the club for 12 years, had earned his patch through loyalty and brotherhood, and the kind of bonds that were forged in fire and sealed in blood. The Hell's Angels weren't what the movies made them out to be. Not entirely. Sure, there was history there. Sure, there were rules and codes and things that happened in the shadows that didn't need to see daylight. But the club was also family. The club was protection. The club was belonging to something bigger than yourself, being part of a brotherhood that would ride through hell for you if you needed it. Caleb had needed it once years ago, and the club had shown up, so he'd given his life to it, proudly wore the patch, rode with his brothers every Sunday, showed up when they called. But before he was Hell's Angels vice president, before he was brother Caleb, before any of that, he was Lily's father. Single dad. His ex-wife had left when Lily was 2, decided that motherhood and small-town life weren't the adventure she'd signed up for. She'd moved to California, sent birthday cards sometimes, called on Christmas if she remembered. It had hurt like hell at the time, but Caleb had learned to see it as a blessing because it meant Lily was his to raise, his to protect, his to love with a fierceness that sometimes scared him with its intensity. Lily was his whole world. Everything else, the club, the brotherhood, the reputation, all of it was secondary to that little girl with the gap-toothed smile and the purple bicycle. He had just set down a bag of groceries when he turned around to grab another one and caught movement in his peripheral vision. Saw Lily's bicycle, saw it wobble, saw her fall. His heart stopped. For a fraction of a second, Caleb's brain tried to rationalize it. Kids fall off bikes all the time. She's fine. She's getting up. But she wasn't getting up. And there was someone kneeling over her, some kid, some boy in oversized clothes putting his hands on Lily. Caleb didn't think, didn't process, didn't analyze. He ran. 12 years in the Hells Angels, 20 years of bar fights and street brawls and situations where violence was the language everyone spoke. All of that muscle memory kicked in instantly. Someone was over his daughter. A stranger had put hands on his little girl. Caleb sprinted across the street with the kind of speed that defied his size. His boots pounding pavement, his vision tunneling until all he could see was Lily's prone body and the stranger hunched over her. He was yelling before he even fully registered what he was saying. "Get away from her! Get your hands off my daughter!" The words came out like thunder, like rage, like every protective instinct a father possesses concentrated into a single roar. Malik heard it. Heard the fury, heard the pounding footsteps, heard death coming for him, wrapped in leather and fury. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop because he was on compression 19 of his second cycle. And if he stopped now, this girl would die. So his hands kept pushing, kept counting, kept fighting for her life, even as a giant of a man charged toward him with murder in his eyes. 21, 22, 23. Caleb was 10 feet away. His face was a mask of terror and rage. His hands were reaching out to grab this kid, to throw him aside, to protect his daughter from whatever this was. 26, 27, 28, 5 feet away. Close enough that Malik could see the tattoos on Caleb's arms, could see the Hells Angels patch, could see the absolute conviction in this man's eyes that Malik was a threat that needed to be eliminated. 29, 30. Caleb's hand closed on Malik's collar, fingers gripping the worn fabric, ready to yank him away. And Lily gasped. It wasn't a dramatic gasp, not a movie gasp with flailing and coughing and immediate full consciousness. Just a small, wet intake of breath. Her chest rose on its own, fell, rose again. Caleb froze. His hands still gripped Malik's collar, but his eyes were locked on his daughter, on the rise and fall of her chest, on the color slowly creeping back into her face, on the small movement of her fingers. Malik had stopped compressions the moment she gasped, his hand still hovering over her chest, ready to start again if needed. He was breathing hard, his arms shaking from exertion, his face glistening with sweat and fear, but his deep brown eyes held something beyond fear. They held desperate hope. "She's breathing," Malik whispered. "She's breathing." Lily's eyes fluttered open. Confused, disoriented, she looked up at the sky, then at the faces above her. Her father's terrified expression, the strange black boy's exhausted relief. "Daddy?" Her voice was small and hoarse. "What happened?" Caleb dropped to his knees so fast it should have hurt. His hand released Malik's collar, forgotten as both arms reached for Lily instead. He gathered her up carefully, checking her over with shaking hands, looking for injuries, for explanations, for understanding. "Baby, you fell. You stopped breathing." His voice cracked on the words. This man, who'd faced down rival gangs without flinching, who'd been in situations where showing fear meant showing weakness, was openly crying. Tears cut tracks through the dust on his face as he held his daughter. "I don't remember," Lily said, still confused. "I was riding my bike and then... I don't know. Everything went dark, Caleb pulled her closer, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other wrapped around her small body like he could physically hold her to this world through sheer force of will. He was shaking. This giant tattooed biker was shaking like a leaf. "You're okay," he said, but it sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "You're okay. You're okay." Over Lily's shoulder, Caleb's eyes found Malik. The boy had backed up a few feet, ready to run, looking like a wild animal that expected to be hit. And Caleb really realized, what had just happened. This kid, this homeless boy that Caleb had been about to throw across the street, he'd been doing CPR. He'd been saving Lily's life. Caleb had charged at him, screaming threats, and the kid had just kept going. Kept doing compressions. Kept fighting for a stranger's life, even with danger bearing down on him. Kept going when he could have run. Kept going when any sane person would have protected themselves first. Kept going because a little girl needed saving, and nothing else mattered. The silence that followed was profound. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. The spinning wheels of Lily's bicycle finally came to rest. The afternoon sun continued its golden pour across the scene, indifferent to the miracle that had just unfolded. Caleb stared at Malik. Malik stared back, still poised to flee, still not quite believing he wasn't about to get hurt. "You," Caleb's voice came out rough. "You saved her." Malik didn't respond. Didn't know how to respond. His whole body was still flooded with adrenaline, his mind still caught in the loop of compressions and breaths. "And please live, please live, please live. You saved my daughter's life." Caleb said it again, like he needed to speak it aloud to make it real. Malik's eyes darted to Lily, who was now sitting up in her father's arms, looking confused, but alive, breathing, present. The grayish tint was gone from her skin. Her eyes were clear. She was okay. She was okay. The weight of that hit Malik all at once, and his legs gave out. He sat down hard on the sidewalk, his breathing coming in shaky gasps, his hands trembling in his lap. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. The thing he'd been too young and too scared to do for his mother. He'd done it for this little girl. He'd saved her. If you've ever felt invisible, truly invisible, like you're a ghost moving through a world that doesn't see you or acknowledge your existence, then you know what Malik felt in that moment. You know the weight of being overlooked, of having people's eyes slide past you like you're not even there, of wondering if you even matter at all to anyone. But in that moment, on that sidewalk, with a little girl breathing and a giant of a man staring at him with tears running down his face, Malik wasn't invisible. He was seen. He was real. He mattered. And sometimes that's what heroes look like. Not people in capes or uniforms or shining armor. Sometimes heroes are 10-year-old boys in second-hand shoes that don't fit, living in alleys, eating from soup kitchens, carrying everything they own in a torn backpack. Sometimes heroes are the ones everyone else has decided aren't worth looking at. Sometimes courage comes from the places we least expect. Sometimes the people we ignore are the ones most ready to save us. The morning after Lily came home from the hospital, Caleb Bennett woke up with a singular purpose burning in his chest. Find the boy. Find Malik. The doctors had confirmed what Caleb already knew in his bones. Without that CPR, without those crucial minutes of someone fighting for her life, Lily would have died on that sidewalk. Brain damage at minimum. More likely, she simply wouldn't have made it. A 10-year-old homeless kid had saved his daughter's life, and then vanished like smoke. Caleb couldn't let that stand. Wouldn't let it stand. He started where all searches begin, at the beginning, the spot where it happened. He stood on that sidewalk in the morning light, Lily's purple bicycle now safely in their garage, and looked at the alley where Malik had emerged from. Empty now, Just a gap between buildings, a dumpster, some scattered trash. Nothing that suggested a child lived there. But someone had to know something. Caleb walked into Higgins' corner store first, the little family-owned shop that had been on this block for 30 years. Mrs. Higgins looked up from behind the counter, and her expression shifted when she saw the Hell's Angels patch on his vest. Not fear, exactly, but caution. The careful neutrality of someone who'd learned that survival meant not getting involved. "Morning," Caleb said, working to keep his voice gentle. "I'm looking for information about a kid. 10 years old, black, thin, wearing oversized clothes. Might come around here sometimes." Mrs. Higgins's face gave nothing away. "Many kids come in here. This one's homeless, living on the streets. He saved my daughter's life yesterday, and I need to find him. I need to thank him." Something flickered in Mrs. Higgins's eyes. Recognition, maybe sympathy, but she shook her head. "I mind my business. You should too." It went like that all morning. The bodega owner, who suddenly didn't speak English well enough to understand the question. The postal worker, who'd seen nothing, knew nothing, remembered nothing. The regular sitting outside the laundromat, who got very interested in his phone the moment Caleb approached. Nobody wanted to talk to the Hell's Angel about the homeless boy, and Caleb understood why. In neighborhoods like this, you survive by staying invisible, by not drawing attention, by never volunteering information to anyone who looked like they might have authority or power. The patch on his back might mean brotherhood to him, but to them, it meant trouble, questions, complications they couldn't afford. What Caleb didn't know yet was that Malik was watching him from a parking garage 3 blocks away, terrified that the man had come back angry. Terrified that yesterday's miracle was about to become today's nightmare. 2 days of searching had taught Caleb Bennett patience he didn't know he possessed. 2 days of dead ends and closed doors and people who looked right through him when he asked about a homeless boy named Malik. 2 days of Lily asking when she could thank the boy who saved her, and Caleb having no answer to give. On the 3rd day, Caleb tried the public library. It was a long shot, but Ms. Rodriguez at the community center had mentioned off the record, voice low like she was sharing classified information, that sometimes the street kids went there. Warm in winter, cool in summer, free bathrooms. Nobody bothered you if you looked like you were reading. Caleb pushed through the heavy doors into the hushed sanctuary of books and fluorescent lighting. The librarian at the front desk glanced at his vest, his boots, his general appearance, and her hand moved subtly toward the phone. He was used to that reaction. "Just looking for someone," Caleb said quietly, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "A kid. I'm not here to cause trouble." He found Malik in the back corner, tucked into a chair that was too big for him, a book open in his lap. The boy looked smaller somehow than he had on that sidewalk, more fragile, like he was trying to fold himself into invisibility to take up as little space as possible in a world that had made it clear there wasn't room for him. Malik's head snapped up the moment Caleb rounded the bookshelf. His eyes went wide, his body tensed. Every muscle coiled to run. Caleb stopped moving, held perfectly still, the way you might freeze when encountering a deer on a trail, knowing that any sudden movement would send it bounding away into the trees. "Hey," Caleb said, barely above a whisper. Then he did something Malik clearly didn't expect. He sat down. Not in the chair next to Malik. That would be too close, too threatening. But on the floor, back against the bookshelf opposite, creating distance and lowering himself so he wasn't looming over the boy. Caleb didn't speak again, didn't ask questions, didn't make demands. He simply reached into the bag he'd been carrying and pulled out a sandwich, turkey and cheese from the deli, chips, an apple, a bottle of water. He placed them on the floor between himself and Malik, an offering, no strings attached. Then Caleb pulled out a book he'd grabbed randomly from a shelf on his way over and opened it. Pretended to read, gave Malik space to decide what happened next. The silence stretched. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10. Malik's eyes kept darting between Caleb, the food, and the nearest exit. Calculating, weighing risk against hunger, trust against survival instinct. 15 minutes. 20. Caleb turned a page he hadn't actually read. Waited. At 30 minutes, Malik whispered, "Is your daughter okay?" Caleb looked up, met those weary brown eyes. "She's perfect. Because of you." The next morning, Malik returned to his spot near the alley. It was routine now, the small rituals that structured his days. Morning at the library when it opened. Afternoon near the alley where he could watch the world pass by. Evening at the shelter if they had space, or the condemned building 3 blocks over if they didn't. Survival was about patterns, about knowing where to be and when, about making yourself small enough that trouble passed you by. He was sitting on the cracked curb, the backpack Caleb had returned to him yesterday resting against his legs, when he heard it. At first it was just a distant rumble. It was just a distant thunder, maybe. A truck passing on the highway, something he could ignore. But then it got louder, closer. Not thunder at all, but something mechanical and purposeful and moving in his direction with absolute certainty. One motorcycle, then another, then more. The sound built like a wave rolling down the quiet residential street where nothing louder than a lawnmower usually disturbed the peace. 3 motorcycles became 5. 5 became 10. The rumble became a roar that shook windows and set off car alarms and pulled people from their houses to see what catastrophe was headed their way. 10 became 15. 15 became 20. 20 became 23. Neighbors emerged onto porches. Mrs. Higgins stepped out of her store, hands shading her eyes. Parents grabbed their children, pulled them close. Everyone knew that patch. Everyone knew what Hell's Angels meant. Trouble. Violence. The kind of danger you didn't ask questions about. You just got out of the way and hoped it passed you by. The convoy rolled down Maple Street like thunder given form. Chrome gleaming in the morning sun, leather and metal, and the raw power of 23 motorcycles moving in perfect formation. And they stopped in front of Malik. Every single one. Engines cutting off in sequence until the roar faded to silence. And 23 men sat astride their bikes, facing a 10-year-old boy who'd frozen with his back against a chain-link fence and nowhere to run. Caleb stepped off his bike first. He walked toward Malik slowly, deliberately, and the boy's eyes were wide with confusion and fear and complete inability to understand what was happening. "We've been looking for you, brother," Caleb said. Brother. Not kid, not boy, not even his name. Brother. Malik's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Behind Caleb, 23 grown men, leather vests decorated with patches earned through loyalty and blood, tattoos covering arms that had seen fights and scars and hard years, faces weathered by lives lived on the edge, stood in formation. And they'd come for a homeless 10-year-old who owned nothing but a torn backpack and oversized clothes. Caleb reached into his saddlebag and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. He knelt down, bringing himself to Malik's eye level, and held it out. "Open it," Caleb said gently. Malik's hands shook as he unwrapped the package. Inside was leather, soft and supple, and clearly new. A vest, child-sized, custom-made. No patches yet, but the leather itself was protection. Belonging. Family. "You saved one of ours," Caleb said. "That makes you one of ours." The Hells Angels had a reputation in this neighborhood. 20 years of leather vests and rumbling engines and the kind of presence that made people cross the street. They were the men mothers warned their children about. The club that police watched carefully. the brotherhood that operated by rules most folks didn't understand and didn't want to. But the Hells Angels also had connections, and Caleb Bennett knew exactly how to use them. The bike shop on 5th Street had been there for 40 years, run by a man named Tommy, who'd sold Caleb his first motorcycle back when Caleb was 19, and stupid, and thought speed was the same thing as freedom. Tommy owed the club nothing. But when Caleb walked in and told him about a 10-year-old boy who'd saved his daughter's life, who'd performed CPR on a sidewalk while Caleb had been ready to throw him aside, who now had nothing but needed everything, Tommy listened. "Kid needs a bike," Caleb said simply. "Something reliable. Something that says he belongs here." 2 days later, there was a bicycle. Not purple like Lily's, but sleek black and silver with sturdy tires and a bell that actually worked. Tommy didn't ask for payment, just nodded when Caleb came to pick it up and said, "Tell the kid to ride safe." The landlord on 8th Street was harder. Vincent Caruso had 42 rental properties and a reputation for being tighter with money than bark on a tree. But he also had a daughter, 3 daughters actually. And when Caleb sat across from him in that cramped office that smelled like coffee and old paperwork and told the story, really told it, every detail, the fall and the CPR and the boy who'd vanished in the shadows. Vincent's expression changed. "I got a studio," Vincent said finally. "Above the dry cleaners. Been empty 6 months. Need some work." "How much?" Caleb asked. Vincent looked at him for a long moment. "You Hells Angels. You take care of your own, right?" "Always." "Then I guess the kid's one of yours now. First year's free. After that, we'll talk." The school principal, Mrs. Patterson, had told the Hells Angels no 100 times over the years. "No, you can't hold your charity motorcycle run through the school parking lot. No, you can't recruit at career day. No, you can't use the gymnasium for your meetings." She had rules, policies, procedures that didn't bend for anyone. But she'd also been an educator for 33 years, and she understood what it meant when a child fell through the cracks. When Caleb showed up at her office, not demanding, not intimidating, just asking, and told her about Malik, about his mother dying, about foster care failures, about a boy who'd learned CPR because he promised himself he'd never be unprepared again. Mrs. Patterson's rules suddenly had room for exceptions. "Bring him in Monday," she said. "We'll get him enrolled." The doctor, the grocery store, the community center. Caleb told the story everywhere. And somehow when a Hells Angel asked you to help save a kid who'd already saved someone else, no became impossible. 3 days after the motorcycles rolled down Maple Street, Malik walked into his new apartment for the first time. It was small, just one room with a tiny kitchen and a bathroom that barely fit a shower. But it was clean. It was safe. It had a lock on the door that Malik controlled. And in the center of the empty room sat a bed, a desk, and a note written in Caleb's blocky handwriting. "We'll help you fill it. Welcome home, your brothers." Malik stood in that doorway and cried for the first time in 2 years. But there was a problem. 3 days after that, social services showed up. Her name was Karen Miller, and she'd been a caseworker for Child Protective Services for 11 years. She'd seen everything. Homes that looked perfect on the outside but hid horrors behind closed doors. Parents who meant well but couldn't provide. Children who'd learned to lie to protect the adults who hurt them. 11 years had taught her to trust the system, follow the procedures, and never let emotion override protocol. When the anonymous call came in about a 10-year-old living alone in an apartment above a dry cleaner's being supported by members of a motorcycle club, every alarm in Karen's training went off at once. She showed up on a Thursday afternoon, clipboard in hand, ready to document what she already suspected she'd find. She knocked on the door of that studio apartment, and when Malik answered, this small black boy with weary eyes and clothes that finally fit, she saw exactly what her training told her to see. Red flags everywhere. A child living alone. No legal guardian on the premises. Financial support coming from a motorcycle club with a documented history of criminal activity. A 10-year-old who should be in school, in the system, in a proper foster placement with background-checked adults and regular oversight. Karen saw danger where there was love, saw criminals where there were heroes, saw a boy who needed saving from the very people who'd already saved him. "Are you Malik Williams?" she asked, her voice professional and distant. Malik nodded, his hand tight on the doorframe, already understanding that this woman represented everything he'd been running from. "I'm from Child Protective Services. I need to ask you some questions about your living situation." Within an hour, Karen had filled 3 pages with notes. Within 2 hours, she'd spoken to the landlord, the neighbors, and tracked down Caleb Bennett. Within 3 hours, she'd filed an emergency petition with the family court. Caleb stood in that cramped CPS office, hands clenched at his sides, trying to keep his voice level. "You know what that kid did? He saved my daughter's life. Performed CPR on a sidewalk when she stopped breathing. Where were you then? Where was the system when he was sleeping in condemned buildings? When he was eating from dumpsters? When he was invisible and nobody cared?" Karen's face remained neutral. "Mr. Bennett, I understand you're grateful, but gratitude doesn't qualify someone as a guardian. You have a criminal record. You're affiliated with an organization that what? That showed up for him? That gave him a home? That made sure he had food and clothes and people who actually see him? Mr. Bennett, the law is clear. A minor cannot live without proper guardianship. If you want to pursue legal custody, there's a process. Until then, Malik needs to be placed in emergency foster care." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. Foster care. The same system that had failed Malik before. The same cycle that had left him running for the streets because anything was better than another house that wasn't home. "You can't," Caleb said, his voice breaking. "You can't put him back in that." "I don't have a choice," Karen said, and she almost sounded sorry. "I'm filing the paperwork now." The caseworker made her notes. Forms were filed. And for 72 hours, Malik and Caleb waited to learn if the system would tear apart what courage had built. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning. Family Court, Judge Rebecca Vance presiding. Caleb had never been so terrified in his life, and he'd faced down situations where terror was the appropriate response. But this was different. This was watching someone he'd promised to protect being taken away by rules and regulations and people who'd never bothered to ask what Malik actually needed. The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, with fluorescent lights that made everything look harsh and cold. Caleb sat at one table with a lawyer the club had paid for. A good one, expensive, the kind who usually defended them against very different charges. Malik sat beside him, wearing new clothes that Lily had helped pick out, looking smaller than ever in the formal setting. Karen Miller sat at the other table with the county attorney. And in the gallery behind Caleb, 23 Hell's Angels filled the benches, silent and watchful. The character witnesses came one by one. Ms. Carter from the shelter, who testified about the CPR class, about how Malik had paid attention like his life depended on it, had asked questions, had wanted to be ready. The library coordinator, who talked about finding Malik there every day, reading, learning, never causing trouble, just trying to better himself with the only resources he had access to. Lily's doctor, who explained the medical reality. Without CPR, Lily Bennett would have died. And the person who saved her was sitting right there. Neighbors testified about the transformation they'd witnessed. The boy who'd been invisible, suddenly seen. Suddenly cared for, suddenly thriving under the protection of men the system wanted to label as dangerous. And then Lily walked up to the judge's bench. 7 years old in a yellow dress, clutching a piece of paper that she'd folded and unfolded so many times it was soft as cloth. Judge Vance leaned down. "Hello, sweetheart. What do you have there?" Lily unfolded the drawing. It showed a girl on a bike, an angel without wings wearing oversized clothes, and the words written in careful crayon, "He saved me. Don't take him away." "That's Malik," Lily said, her voice small but certain. "He's my hero and he's my daddy's brother now. You can't take brothers away from each other. That's not fair." Judge Rebecca Vance had been on the bench for 19 years. Before that, she'd served in the Marine Corps for 12. She knew the Hells Angels by reputation, had presided over cases involving the club, had sent some of their members to prison. She had no illusions about who they were or what they were capable of, but she also knew what service looked like, what brotherhood meant, what it meant when grown men showed up in force, not to intimidate, but to stand witness for a child. She looked at Caleb. "Mr. Bennett, you understand the responsibility you're requesting?" "Yes, Your Honor, more than anything." "And you understand that this court will be monitoring this placement? That any violation, any sign that this child is in danger, will result in immediate removal?" "Yes, Your Honor." "I understand." Judge Vance looked at Malik. "Young man, is this what you want?" Malik nodded, not trusting his voice. "Temporary guardianship granted to Caleb Bennett, pending full adoption proceedings. Case management will conduct regular home visits. We'll reconvene in 6 months to assess permanent placement." The gavel came down. The courtroom erupted. Not with cheers, this wasn't that kind of victory, but with the release of held breath. With relief. With the weight of fear lifting, Malik collapsed into Caleb's arms. This boy who'd learned not to cry, who'd taught himself to be strong, finally letting himself break because he was safe enough to fall apart. And in the back row, 23 Hells Angels stood up. Not cheering, not celebrating, just standing in respect, in recognition, brothers welcoming a brother home. 6 months can feel like forever when you're 10 years old. 6 months ago, Malik Williams had been invisible, a ghost boy living in alleys, eating from shelter lines, carrying everything he owned in a torn backpack. 6 months ago, family was a photograph of a mother he'd lost, and a dream he'd stopped believing could come true. Now, on a Tuesday morning in October, Malik walked through the front doors of Jefferson Elementary with a backpack full of actual school supplies and a lunch that Caleb had packed that morning. The other kids knew his name. Some of them were even his friends. Real friends. The kind who saved him seats at lunch and picked him for their team in gym class and invited him to birthday parties. Mrs. Patterson, the principal who'd bent her rules to let him enroll, watched him navigate the hallway with the easy confidence of a child who finally believed he belonged somewhere. She'd seen a lot of transformations in 33 years of education, but something about this one felt different. Felt like proof that the system could work when people chose to make it work. After school, Malik rode his bicycle home, the black and silver one from Tommy's shop that he'd named Shadow because it was silent and fast. Caleb jogged beside him like he did every day, close enough to catch him if he fell, but far enough back to let him find his own balance. They'd been doing this for months now, these afternoon rides through the neighborhood, and Malik had gone from wobbly uncertainty to confident speed. "You're getting too fast for me, kid," Caleb called out, slightly winded. "You're just getting old," Malik shot back, grinning over his shoulder. "Watch it, or I'll make you do dishes for a month." They both laughed, this easy banter that felt like home. Dinner that evening was spaghetti, Lily's favorite. They sat around the small kitchen table in Caleb's house, like they'd been doing it forever. Lily talked about her day at school, about the science project on volcanoes, about how her friend Madison had the best sticker collection, but Lily's was pretty good too. Malik listened and added his own stories, and Caleb watched them both with something that felt dangerously close to complete happiness. After dinner, Caleb handed Malik a small package wrapped in black cloth. "What's this?" Malik asked. "Open it." Inside was a patch, embroidered letters on leather backing meant to be sewn onto the vest that Malik wore everywhere. Now, 2 words: family first. "Every Hell's Angel earns their patches," Caleb said quietly. "This one? You earned it the day you saved Lily, but it took 6 months for the club to make it official. You're one of us now, Malik." "Really? One of us?" Malik traced the letters with his finger, his eyes burning with tears. He didn't try to hide them anymore. He'd learned it was okay to cry when you were happy. That emotions weren't weakness. That being vulnerable with people who loved you was actually the bravest thing you could do. Remember that alley where Malik used to hide? The one between 5th and 6th Street where he'd wedged cardboard behind a dumpster and called it home? The Hell's Angels had transformed it, cleaned it out, brought in soil and lumber, built raised garden beds and planted vegetables that anyone in the neighborhood could harvest. They'd put up a little sign: Community Garden. Take what you need. Give what you can. It wasn't charity. It was a statement. A reminder that invisible people existed, that they mattered, that somebody cared enough to create a space where they could be seen and fed and treated with dignity. On a Saturday morning, Malik stood in front of a room at the 5th Street shelter, looking out at 15 faces that wore the same expression he used to wear. Weary hope mixed with the kind of exhaustion that comes from surviving when the world wants you to disappear. Ms. Carter stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder, tears already forming in her eyes because she understood the poetry of this moment. The boy who'd learned CPR in this very room 6 months ago, who'd paid attention like his life depended on it, was now teaching others. "My name is Malik," he began, his voice stronger than it had any right to be. "6 months ago, I was living on the streets. I learned CPR here because I wanted to be ready, just in case. I never thought I'd actually use it. But then a little girl fell off her bike and stopped breathing. And everything I learned here, everything Ms. Carter taught me, it saved her life." He paused, looking at each person in the room. "You never know when you'll be someone's miracle. But you can be ready. You can be brave. You can show up. That's what I'm here to teach you today." For the next hour, Malik demonstrated chest compressions on the training dummy, explained rescue breaths, walked them through the steps with patience and clarity, answered questions, encouraged the people who were afraid they'd do it wrong. "Doing something is always better than doing nothing," he told them. "Even if you're scared, even if you're not sure, trying to save someone is always the right choice." Caleb stood in the back of the room, Lily holding his hand, watching this boy who'd become his son teach courage to strangers. 6 months ago, Caleb had been ready to throw Malik aside, had seen danger where there was heroism, had almost let fear and bias override everything that mattered. Now he understood. Sometimes angels wear second-hand shoes. Sometimes heroes are the ones society overlooks and ignores and decides aren't worth seeing. Sometimes the people we're quickest to judge are the ones most ready to save us. And sometimes family isn't born. It isn't about blood or biology or legal documents, though those help. Sometimes family is chosen, earned, built from courage and gratitude and 23 motorcycles rolling down a quiet street to say, "You're one of ours now." Built from a father learning that brotherhood means showing up, from a community deciding that invisible children deserve to be seen, from a boy who'd lost everything, finding out that sometimes when you save someone else, you save yourself too. The local news picked it up first. A human interest story about a homeless black boy who saved a biker's daughter, about a motorcycle club that responded with compassion instead of the violence people expected. Channel 7 ran it during the evening broadcast, and by morning it had been shared 3,000 times on social media. Then the regional outlets picked it up, then the national ones. Within a week, Malik's story was everywhere. Newspapers, morning shows, online publications that usually focused on conflict and division, suddenly desperate to share something that restored faith in humanity. The Hells Angels, usually portrayed as villains in leather, as the dangerous element that law-abiding citizens should fear, were being called heroes. Not just Caleb and his chapter, but the broader organization found themselves in an unfamiliar position, being celebrated for what they'd always known they were. Brotherhood. Family. People who showed up when it mattered. Other motorcycle clubs started paying attention. The Iron Riders in Detroit launched a mentorship program, pairing club members with at-risk youth. The Desert Rats in Arizona partnered with homeless shelters to provide job training. The Coastal Brothers in Oregon started a scholarship fund for kids aging out of foster care. It spread like wildfire. This idea that tough men on motorcycles could be protectors instead of threats. That strength could be used for building up instead of tearing down. The Fifth Street shelter received donations that changed everything. Enough money to hire a full-time CPR instructor. Enough to provide certification courses for free to anyone who walked through their doors. Ms. Carter cried when she saw the checks, overwhelmed by strangers deciding that teaching homeless people to save lives was worth their money. Malik and Caleb became speakers. Schools invited them to talk about courage, about family, about showing up when the world tells you to look away. They stood together in gymnasiums and auditoriums. This white father and black son who'd found each other through crisis and told their story to thousands of students who'd never thought twice about the invisible people they passed every day. Heroes don't always look like what you expect, Malik would say, his voice steady now, confident in a way that 6 months of belonging had built. Sometimes they look like a girl who needs help. Sometimes they look like bikers on motorcycles. Sometimes they look like the person you're ignoring on the street corner. The city council took notice. Councilwoman Rodriguez, who'd been pushing for homeless services reform for years, saw an opportunity. She drafted legislation requiring CPR and basic first aid training in all public assistance programs, shelters, food banks, community centers. If Malik had learned CPR because a shelter offered training, how many other lives could be saved by making that standard instead of optional? They called it Malik's Law. It passed unanimously. The boy who'd been invisible 6 months ago now had legislation named after him. A permanent reminder that preparation and compassion could change everything. One afternoon, one fall, one boy who refused to run away when running was all he knew. That's how you change a city. That's how you prove that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up when someone needs saving. Malik saved Lily with CPR. The Hells Angels saved Malik with community. But who saves the thousands of other invisible children still living in alleys, still eating from dumpsters, still wondering if anyone would notice if they disappeared? That answer starts with people like you. If this story moved you, do 3 things. First, subscribe. Because stories like this remind us that goodness exists, that unexpected heroes walk among us, that hope isn't naive. It's necessary. Hitting subscribe means you're choosing to see people others ignore, choosing to believe that ordinary moments can contain extraordinary courage. Click it if you're standing against indifference. Second, comment "No more invisible kids." Every comment is a vote for compassion over judgment, for action over apathy. Let's flood this section with people who believe every child deserves a chance, who understand that society is measured by how it treats its most vulnerable. Make your voice count. Third, share this video. Someone in your life needs to remember that one person can change everything. That courage doesn't require resources, just heart. That angels wear secondhand shoes. Your share might reach someone who's given up hope, or someone who has the power to help but hasn't been moved to action yet. The trolls will say this is too good to be true. The cynics will claim it's staged. But Caleb, Lily, and Malik don't care what critics think. They're too busy building family from fragments, proving that brotherhood beats blood every single time. So, what's it going to be? Will you scroll past, or will you stand with the people who stop, who see, who save? Hit subscribe, join the community, be the person who shows up. Because the next time someone needs saving, it might be you holding the power to be their miracle. Welcome to the family.